The current MOC is quite difficult. The enemies are really tanky, so that means understanding the mechanics of the enemies and the MOC will help you squeezing out the extra little bit of cycles so you can get all the rewards. So hereby this guide where I will be talking about MOC 12 though. So let's get to it. The first very important thing is the trotter. Since whenever you kill a trotter, elite enemies take damage. Alright, so how much damage should I do to this trotter to kill him? Well, from my testing, he has like around 85k HP. Around 85k, somewhere around there. But the exact number doesn't really matter, because all we really need to know is that the damage it does to elite enemies is more than the HP of this trotter. And the damage it does to elite enemies when you kill a trotter is, if we just round it up, around 122k damage to each elite enemy. So this damage won't be done to anyone else apart from the elite enemies. So not the summons from this guy right here, or the summons from the bug, where he summons those little bugs. So only to the big looking enemies basically. Alright, so knowing this, that the trotter does 142k to each elite enemy every time you kill a trotter, means that blast and AoE DPSs are quite nice. But you can also of course play with single target DPSs. But the thing you need to keep in mind when going for the single target DPS is this. If, for example, one elite enemy is on the field, there are some trotters on the field, and you, for example, use Fei Xiao, you don't want to Fei Xiao ult this trotter, because let's say Fei Xiao's ult does how much damage? 250k damage. That means this damage is better done to the one elite enemy on the field than to this trotter. But of course, if there were two elite enemies on the field, then it would be worth it to ult this trotter, because then the trotter would do 284k damage in total. So 142 to one elite enemy and 142 to the other enemy. But in general, you should try not to overkill the trotter to begin with. So with your Fei Xiao, you would want to kill this trotter with your skills and throw attacks, and save your ults for the elite enemies. But how does it look like then for an elite enemy when we kill a trotter? Since we don't see the HP of the enemies in the game, unfortunately. So if I'm in a situation like this, what is better for me to do? Kill this trotter right here, or try to target the elite enemies? What would be the best course of action be? Since the enemies have like a billion HP, for the first sight of MOC 12, for the first wave, it looks like this when you kill a trotter. For this shadow woman, it will do a bit like this damage, and for this wolf enemy, it will do this kind of damage. For the second wave, regarding Swarok, when you kill a trotter, he will lose around 6 to 7% HP. It really depends how close his HP was to a percentage. So when you kill a trotter, Swarok will lose his HP around 6 to 7%. That's a thing that you can keep in mind. For the second sight, killing a trotter does reduce around this much HP from this robot and around this much HP from this monster. And these elite enemies are a bit less tanky compared to the first sight. Makes sense since we got this bug right over here with 2 phases. So how much percent HP does he lose when you kill a trotter? He loses, in from my testing, like around 8% HP the whole time. Just quite nice, more than Swarok's HP. So this all naturally basically means that you always want to make sure there is enough room for trotters to spawn at the start of every cycle. Since there can be only 5 enemies on the field the whole time, that means you need to make sure there is at max 3 enemies on the field. And sure, you can ignore the trotters and just raw dog it, go full on the boss. That's possible too. But generally, if you want to make clearing MOC 12 a bit easier, killing the trotters will make your run go a bit smoother. So what do the trotters do then when it's their turn? Well, on their first turn, they do nothing. On their second turn, you're not able to reduce their toughness anymore. That's not a really big problem if they got a little bit of HP left. But if you go for a super break team, you want to make sure you weakness break the trotter before they get their second turn. And if you're running a crit team, then you can afford to not kill the trotter before their second turn. But weakness breaking a trotter makes it also a bit easier to kill them because of that little bit of weakness break damage. And if a trotter gets their third turn, well, then they flee. But you want to make sure you kill the trotters to make room for the new trotters to spawn at the next cycle. So now let's understand the mechanics of the enemies. For the first sight, for the first wave, who should you prioritize to kill between this shadow or this wolf? Well, I'd say prioritize the shadow woman first. And of course, on the side, the trotter should die too, of course. But that is what I already explained in the trotter explanation. But why is the shadow your priority? Because with every attack the shadow does, she has a chance to imprison you. And when you get imprisoned, your action gets delayed by quite a bit. Even if you cleanse it, it's already too late because your action has already been delayed. So you want to make sure this shadow does as little attacks to you as possible. And the most interesting thing about the shadow is this actually. She has an ability where she will go into this charging state. You might have already seen it. In this charging state, she starts with 9 stacks. Every time you attack her, she loses a stack. And when she gets a turn, when she is still charging, she will do a bouncing attack for every stack she has. So that means you want to attack her as much as possible to reduce the stacks by 1 the whole time. But preferably, you don't want to even allow her to do this charging attack. And how do we do that? When you weakness break her, her whole charging state will go away and hopefully you will be able to kill her then. And she will try to charge again. That's the main thing of her. So when she's charging, weakness breaker, you're good to go. She will try again later. Every attack she does has a chance to imprison you. And when you get imprisoned, it's a pain in the ass since you have already been delayed. Cleansing that doesn't help. Well, if you cleanse it, then now you're able to cast your ult of that imprisoned character since the imprisonment gets removed. So that's a thing. But when your DPS gets imprisoned, I'd recommend to just start over, since now you have some DPS loss. And now let's get to the wolf. The most interesting thing about the wolf is this. As you can see, he has 4 stacks right here. When he has 4 stacks, he goes into a moon rage state. And when he's in that moon rage state, he has a chance to apply terror grip on you with every attack he does. And terror grip is that weird eye-looking icon that you will see above your character. The thing about this terror grip thingy is that when you still have this terror grip on you after 2 of your allies' turn, you will become terrified. That means that ally cannot take an action until the next turn, which is something you don't want to happen. So how do I remove this terror grip then? Well, just attack this wolf. That's it basically. So you see a weird looking icon above your character's head, attack the wolf and it will go away. If your character does blast or AoE attacks, that will count too. So you don't have to specifically focus this target. So if Fuge had like a stack here, and I did a basic attack on this shadow, then this eye would be removed too. And when will this moon rage of this wolf go away? Well, 2 ways. You weakness break him, then he will lose the moon rage state. And the other way to remove moon rage is, well, it just goes automatically basically. And that is this icon right here, which will pop up somewhere in the action bar. And when this thing gets a turn, the wolf's moon rage will also get dispelled. So 2 ways. Weakness break him, or wait until this thing here gets a turn, which will appear when the wolf goes into moon rage. And now let's get to the second wave. We got Swarok and the wolf. The wolf works exactly the same as in the first wave, nothing different. So if you want to know how he works, go to the first wave part. Regarding Swarok, there are only really 2 interesting things he does. The first interesting thing is he has this single target attack, which will delay the action of an ally of yours with guarantee. So there is no chance to effect resist that, which is quite a pain, yes? So it is just RNG hoping that someone like Aventurin gets his action delayed instead of a Firefly. And he also has the other single target attack, which just doesn't do anything. It just does a single target attack. So on his first turn, he does a normal single target attack. On his second turn, he does this irritating single target attack. And on his second turn, on his first action, he will summon a hand. And the hand is the biggest thing about Swarok. So he summons this hand, and this hand, as you can see, and which you might have already noticed when playing against Swarok, will grab an ally of yours randomly. And when he grabs that ally, he will do a little bit of damage, and every time the hand gets a turn while an ally is still grabbed, he will do a little bit of damage. But you don't even want to get to the point that the hand gets another turn with a grabbed ally. So how do we make sure of that? Well, there are 2 ways to save an ally. 1, you just weakness break the hand and your ally will be saved. 2, you just kill him. But the best case is to not get your ally grabbed in the first case. And how do we make sure of that? Well, that is, before the hand does anything, that Swarok should be weakness broken. So if Swarok is weakness broken and the hand hasn't grabbed anyone yet, then the hand won't do anything. He will just stay there. So for example, if no one was grabbed here, so the hand hasn't grabbed anyone yet, and we see on the left here on the action bar that after Swarok the hand gets a turn. If we can make sure that Swarok is weakness broken before the hand gets a turn, then the hand won't do basically anything. And that's the best case scenario. But that's not always possible, depending on how the run goes and what kind of team you run. So hereby some restart guidelines if you want to squeeze as much cycles as possible to get all your rewards before the MOC ends. So the first time you can do a restart is when this shadow imprisons you. When she imprisons you with any attack, your character's action will get delayed, and even if you cleanse that imprisonment, your action would have already been delayed. It would be too late. That means less DPS, the wall flow of your team gets thrown off. So you need to make sure you kill this shadow as fast as possible so she does as little attacks as she can. And while she is charging, make sure you weakness break her so she doesn't do that attack with the wall bounces. The other time you can do restart is when this wolf applies Terrified on you. And that is different from Terror Grip, since Terror Grip is this eye thingy on you, which you can easily dispel if you just attack this wolf once. So when do I get terrified then? When I have this eye on me after 2 turns. Then your ally will become terrified and can't do anything until their next turn. So if they get terrified, make sure you restart, since, well, now you have an ally who can't do anything for a whole turn. Sure, if it is Ranmei with her ult and to skill up, it might be alright. But in general, you don't want your character to get to that point. Another time I'd recommend you to restart this when this single target attack of Svarog, which is guaranteed to delay the action of an ally, hits an important character. So if my Firefly in her Super Saiyan state gets her action delayed, that means she will be pushed down in the action bar, which means she would have done an attack less in her Super Saiyan state. But if, for example, my Ranmei gets her action delayed, I can still afford that compared to Firefly. So now let's get to the second side, wave 1. What happens here? Well, the first interesting thing to note is this monster right here. The first turn this monster gets, he will summon soldiers, which will consume his HP by a little bit, as you can see on the right here. And when he summons these monsters, he will get a buff, which says that whenever there is a soldier on the field with a rebirth buff, when this monster attacks, then he will heal. So as you can see, he has this ring around him. When this big monster attacks, he will heal from that attack. So how do we make sure that this monster doesn't heal when he attacks? One thing you can do is, with, for example, Pella, use her skill on this monster to remove his buff directly. So remove this buff. So now he won't heal anymore when he doesn't attack. The other way is, if there is just one soldier on the field, so let's say this one here does exist. So there is just one soldier on the field. The better way is to just use Pella's skill on him to remove this buff. Because this rebirth buff also makes sure that when this monster dies, he will respawn with half his HP or something. Since one, that will automatically remove the main monster's buff, and this monster won't revive anymore when he dies. But of course, if you don't use Pella or have Lucha, then just kill this monster once and he will lose that rebirth buff and he will lose that heal buff to automatically to that big monster. And if there are 2 of those soldiers on the field that the big monster summoned, then yeah, then you need to remove his buff too to make sure that the main buff gets removed as well. So if there are 2 soldiers on the field, try to just remove the big guy's buff if you have Pella or Lucha or whoever removes buffs. If you don't have a direct buff cleanser, then that means you just need to kill the soldiers. That's what it comes down to then. And if they are killed, they revive and their buff gets removed. That means the big monster guy, his buff will get removed. All of this will automatically happen if you just make sure that you kill the soldiers. Since you want to make sure they are dead, to make sure there is room for trotters to spawn in the next cycle. Since if a next cycle begins and there are still 5 enemies on the field, or let's say you have killed this trotter, now 4 enemies on the field, and there are still 2 soldiers on the field, that means 1 trotter will just spawn. And you want to make sure there are always 2 trotters spawning, since when you kill them, they do quite a lot of damage to the elite enemies. And well, we also got this robot enemy in the middle. There is nothing really special about him apart from one thing, and that is that he has this cycle going on where he doesn't attack, and then he locks onto a random ally of yours. So let's say he locks onto March 7th, and then the next time he gets a turn, he will attack March 7th, and if March 7th does not have a shield, he will do a follow-up attack against a random ally. That's it basically about him. And all of his attacks basically apply bleed on you. And having a debuff cleanser is especially helpful when we are up against this bug right here. Since the whole thing about this bug is basically all his attacks of this bug basically work around the wind shear. His attacks apply wind shear, the small bugs attacks apply wind shear. He has attack where he detonates every wind shear on you when he doesn't attack. So making sure you have a nice debuff cleanser in your team, it will make surviving a bit easier. And what other interesting things are there about this big bug? It is that he can spawn clone bugs on the field. So we're talking about this phase right here. So first wave, when he still has 2 HP bars. So like I said, These are clone bugs he spawns, which are quite irritating. And the thing with these bugs is this. They just have one attack and they have a chance to apply Venture on you. And why are they called clone bugs? Well, when they have the opportunity to clone themselves, when it's their turn, they will clone themselves. So if there was no trotter on the field and this bug gets a turn, then he will clone himself. But he can clone himself every 2 turns. So that means having a DPS or sub DPS who can do consistent blast or AoE attacks to kill these bugs is quite helpful to make room for the trotters to spawn when a cycle starts. But of course, if you got a good ass sailor, she can also work here since she's so fast. But the general recommendation is to have a blast or AoE DPS here. And like we know, the bug has 2 phases. So when I get to his second phase, what are the interesting things that this bug does? Well, now he can summon Bomb Bug. So what does this Bomb Bug do? Well, on his first turn, he goes into a charging state. On his second turn, he explodes on you. And when he explodes, he's off the field. And that explosion is a blast attack, which has a chance to apply Outrage to the hit allies. And what does Outrage do? Well, Outrage makes it so that that ally attacks random enemies for 2 wall turns. So if someone of yours gets outraged, you need to make sure you can immediately cleanse that outrage. But of course, you don't even want to get to that point even. So before he explodes, so before he gets his second turn, make sure he is dead by then. And from my testing, the big bug only summons these explosive bugs once at the start of his second phase. After that, he summons the clone bugs the whole time. But really all that matters is when you see a bomb bug, make sure he is dead. And what's the most interesting thing that this big bug does in the second phase? That is that he can go into this charging state as well, but this time it is no explosion. It is a big AoE attack, which does damage based on how many bugs there are on the field. And he dispels all the crowd control and weakness breaks from all bugs, which is something you don't want to happen, of course. So try to continuously weakness break this big bug so he does that big AoE attack. And if you cannot withhold him from doing that big AoE attack, then make sure there are as little bugs on the field as possible, since that big AoE attack, its damage is based on how many bugs there are on the field. And favorably, there should be always 0 bugs on the field if you can do consistent AoE or blast attacks or your sailor goes Speedy Gonzalez. That's the guideline. And the last interesting thing that you should know is, which you might have already noticed when you have played this MOC 12, is that when a bug dies, he explodes and does damage to all enemies, and they get the debuff, which increases the damage taken, aka called the vulnerability debuff, if I am right. How much damage does that explosion of the small bugs do on the big bug? It is like around -2% to 3% damage to the big bug. So -2% damage or -3% damage, depending how close the main bug's his HP was close to a percentage. So hereby some guidelines on when you can restart to make sure you can get all the rewards from this MOC 12. The first time I'd recommend you to restart is when this monster heals from his attack. Since if he heals, that means you need to do a lot more damage again to him. You don't want to make that happen. So make sure that he doesn't have that opportunity by removing that buff from him, which can do by one, using for example Pella skill on him, his buff gets removed. Or if there is just one soldier on the field, use Pella skill on that soldier. That way the big monster's buff gets also removed. But if there are 2 soldiers on the field, then of course just use Pella skill on the big monster then. But if you don't have Pella or Lucha or a buff cleanser, just make sure that you kill the small soldiers once and they will get their rebirth buff removed, which means the main monster's buff will also get removed automatically. So make sure that the big monster does not heal, basically. The other time I'd recommend you to restart this when this explosive buff applies outrage on an ally of yours and you're not able to cleanse that debuff. Since if an ally of yours has outrage on them and they get their turn, they will just attack random enemies instead of doing what they were supposed to do. So if your DPS got outraged and they get their turn, they will do a basic attack instead of their skill or their ultimate, whatever you want to do. Make sure you have a reactive cleanser. When you get outraged, immediately cleanse that debuff and you will be fine. But if you cannot cleanse that debuff when your ally gets their turn, then that turn would have been wasted from that ally in the most cases. For example, if your May got outraged and she just cast her skill and ultimate, you can afford that. But in most cases, this bug should not even be allowed to explode on you. And also hereby some general guidelines on where you can restart to squeeze as much cycles as possible to get all your rewards. The first time you can do a restart is when you just get unlucky bounces. So for example, if you are using Asta and you cast her skill, all the bounces go onto this trotter instead of the one you want to go to, and that is Svarog. That's just back bounce RNG. The second time you can restart is when you just have bad aggro luck. So for example, in this case, Tiyun got attacked the whole time the wave prior to this. So she died literally almost immediately, even when she had full HP. That's just bad RNG, a restart. Another time you can restart is when you just have bad crit RNG. So if you have a crit team and you just don't crit, bad RNG, I'd recommend you to restart if it happens too often in that run. So basically, just restart when you have unlucky moments, which you will notice yourself when you're playing. But do remember this though, you can use the Herta and Aglaea before this MOC ends, along with their rerun banners, in which in Herta's case will be Lingsha, Feishao and Jade, and in Aglaea's case that will be Boothill, Robin and Silverwolf. So if you plan on summoning for any of them, you can, before this MOC ends, which is on the 16th of February. But if you're still not sure whether you want to summon for the Herta or Aglaea, because you're not sure who's going to come in 3.2, since you want to plan your summons way ahead of time, well, the 3.2 drip marketing will be coming around the 11th of February, if they keep up that 42 days a new drip marketing cycle up. And of course, when 3.0 releases, when the second half of 3.0 releases, we'll be getting many rewards. For example, at the start of 3.0, we'll be getting the variable dice and the wishful resin, making it so that you can get your perfect relic piece a bit easier. We will be even getting a free temple at start of 3.0, and along the way we'll be getting more events, double relic drops, double trace drops, or whatever they have in store for us, which will make it easier to build your star characters a bit stronger. So my point is basically, don't stress, you got enough time. The focus is to just get your rewards before the MOC refreshes. It is possible to clear this MOC with any character. You can just raw dog it, you can go for a full 4-star team, you can do a 0 cycle, sustainless, whatever you can come up with. If you like it, do it. If you don't like to do all these restarts, then don't. Just wait until you can build up your characters stronger. You just got to do whatever you think is the most fun for you when playing Honkai Star Rail. That's the most important thing. So no stress, you got enough time. I thank you for your time and see you the next time. Bye.